This is Ken Williams of Unfold the Soul. Welcome you to the Status Grow Podcast. Let me tell you, this is going to be real talk focused on disrupting the status quo, baby. So, are you ready? Get set, and let's grow with your hosts, Paul O'Neill and Corey Radish.
All right, welcome to the first ever Status Grow Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Corey Radish, and I can't tell you how excited we are to be here today, January 21st, 2021, and bring you the Status Grow Podcast. This is something that has been in the works for some time with my co-host, who I'll introduce in a second. We have been batting this idea around, and we're now excited that it's finally here and sharing a little bit of that journey for you guys. Here's my unbelievable co-host, Mr. Paul O'Neill.
Corey, thank you so much for the lead, and I'm so proud to undertake this podcast with you. It's been a long journey. It's been a long time coming. The idea started in 2020, and 2020 was the year that was, and 2020 has certainly been the year that has been so far. You know, there's been no short of excitement, that's for sure. I am a very fortunate supervisor of instruction on the Jersey Shore from Lacey Township. Very excited to undertake this podcast with Corey, talking about not only the status quo, but talking about how we can use the status quo and learn lessons on how we can turn status quo into status grow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we're going to talk a little bit in a second about how we came up with that name. But it is, I work for the New Jersey Department of Education, although when I am on the Status Grow Podcast, I do not represent the New Jersey DOE. I just need to share that. But we are going to have guests. We're going to have a real good collection of content that will look at battling the status quo, not just in education, but beyond. And, Paul and I have known each other for it's got to be over 5 years now. We met at ed camps, and we're the two nerds that saw each other at every ed camp, like go on a Saturday, and then the next Saturday you see the same dude at the ed camp, and you're like, all right, there's someone else like me. And then we connected, and our friendship has grown ever since. He's been there for me every step of the way over the past 6 years. But the way that we came to the name was kind of just how Paul and I are going to bring this show to you. We vox multiple times a day. I think sometimes we talk to each other more than we talk to our wives. And when the idea of the show came about, I started to think about, how can we title the show that will do something to buck the status quo? Like, what can I come up with? And I came up with something, and it wasn't very good. And then Paul just sent a text over Voxer and said, dude, what about Status Grow? And I was just blown away. And I think the response that we're getting so far, if you're following us on Twitter, with the name and the new logo that my daughter created, it's been really inspirational to see the reaction we've been getting so far, Paul.
A couple things, Corey. So first and foremost, I appreciate every step of the way in the journey. You allow me to witness the trials and tribulations and growth processes in your journey, and then also being there for me, because equally, folks, Corey has been there through a lot of growth moments for me. The other piece I wanted to add is I've been an educator for 21 years, and I have been blessed to work in 4 different school districts. So by no means do the stories and opinions and such are any reflection of the current school district that I work for. They are just a summarization, so to speak, of experiences. And let's face it, we're using these moments to grow. We're going to have very honest conversation. It's not going to be bobblehead night at the stadium where we all agree and all 3 guests agree. There's going to be times where I say something that Corey doesn't quite agree with, so he's going to push back. There might be something that he says that I'll push back with, or that maybe we have a guest. Sometimes it's going to be just Corey and I, and other times we'll be bringing in guests. So we're definitely looking forward to bringing in our first guest for episode 1 coming up in a few minutes.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think that what makes our relationship work is the pushback, and it's done in a respectful fashion. It's done, with understanding, and it helps us grow. So if Paul is trying out something, or he has an idea, and I say, Paul, I just don't think that's going to work, he doesn't get, hey, Corey, I can't, I'm done with you, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. He keeps digging, and that's kind of what we need to do to break that status quo. And speaking of that, being January 21st, we inaugurated a new president yesterday, and hopefully our country can unite around our next leader. And you think of the status quo, Paul. Watching a lot of the nonsense, obviously, and we're not going to make this political, but there was one line that they continue to use, no matter who the incoming president is transfer of power. And I don't know, I'm a word dude, so like that just bothers me, that transfer of power. It's transfer of leadership, right? In a democracy, the people are the power. And so when we launch that title, it's just something, for me that it could be semantics, but just how I feel. So what are your thoughts?
No, it's all great points, Corey. And on this, I agree 100%, and not only wishing our incoming president luck, because whoever was going to continue these next 4 years, has had a lot of work to do, but by no means were we, a finished product. You never arrive. I think with growth, it's not a destination, it's a journey. So we certainly wish the Biden administration coming in good luck, but also in addition, he's got cabinet members that directly affect us, in the Department of Education. And then in addition, for our state, we have a new acting commissioner for the Department of Education, and we wish her luck as well, because again, lots of work to do, lots of questions, lots of process that need to be examined and evaluated, and asking ourselves questions: are we doing things the best way we possibly can for kids and staff and families in the school community? Or are we just doing what's comfortable? Are we just doing something because it's the way we've always done it?
Yeah, it's a great point. I just watched a webinar the other day where they talked about, the same old system can't continue. And somebody who knows about, dismantling current systems is waiting in the wings. So, Paul, why don't you take the honors of introducing the first ever guest on the StatusGROW podcast?
Oh my goodness, I've had a chance to meet this person live and in the flesh, and I'm going to tell you, his energy fills up the room. You can tell he has a passion and a patience, but he has a passion for the work that he does. And when we talked about the guest for our first episode, and we talked about growth, this is a person that unanimously came to mind for us. When the name was suggested, we both had a big smile on our faces, and we were like, this is the guy. This is the guy we need to make history with. So, Corey, without further ado, let's welcome in the one and only Dr. Basil Marin.
Good morning, fellas. Afternoon now.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. Doctor, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well. Just as I was listening to you all in the background, first, thank you for allowing me to be the first guest on the StatusGROW podcast. I'm just so honored to be the first one. But as I was listening to you all, there you go. I need that mailed for me so I can put it on my wall, man.
Yes, sir.
I was listening to you all, and I was just thinking about what this week signifies, and how what it means for each person, and what it means for schools, and what it means for our nation. And really, like you said, I was really chewing on this, the transfer of power, right? I know we're going to talk about a word I use a lot when I speak about equity, which is access, but I believe that also speaks to transfer of power, withholding of power, and not making people knowledgeable of what's out there for them to be able to continue their own growth, especially for our scholars, for teachers, for our leaders. And so definitely I've been marinating over here, and I'm excited about what we're going to discuss today, because both of you all have been incredible thought leaders in the field, but also for me, it's pushing me, and I always say iron sharpens iron. So I'm excited for this podcast today.
Yeah, and we're excited to have you. And like Paul said, we saw this tweet on the Crazy PLN Twitter chat, and I just reached out to Paul and I said, I think Basil has to be our first guest. I mean, it aligns with everything, and just following your career on Twitter, making some connections recently. And for the people out there, this is the first time we're ever actually live together, and that's the beauty of social media, is that we could connect and support one another. So and I'm just going to pop it up on the screen and show people the tweet, and here we go. We're going to do it in halves. Basil said, "I always say that being silent is not an option, and for those who choose to stay silent, your silence speaks volumes. Right now, more than ever, we need to speak up, speak out against privilege, discrimination, and status quo mindsets." And what sticks out to me is the silent speaks volumes. So Basil, how do we go about speaking up and speaking out? Like, what are some of the things that you're doing to speak up and speak out? And then how do we get others to find your voice?
Absolutely. So thanks for, I had to reread it, even though I wrote it. I had to reread it and say, wow, what was I thinking when I wrote that? And just kind of, sticking to, like you said, the first part, whenever I speak, I always say silence speaks volumes. And whether you're an assistant principal, building leader, teacher, sometimes there are things that are happening within your building, within the world, and when you don't speak up about it, your silence is still saying a lot. Students are watching you, parents are watching you, other leaders are watching you, and so we have to take a stand and really be saying, are we condoning what's happening? Do we agree with what's happening? But you have to pick a side. And someone I really admire who really kind of helped me to reframe what that means is Dr. Matthew Joseph. And he was one of my good friends in this work, and he called me right around George Floyd's death. And he had been to one of the last sessions I had did in person within ASCD. And I presented with Dr. Shante Garrett and Jason Flum. And we did a session on equity. And he said, Basil, one of the last things you said was, we have to take action, and silence is not an option. And he said, I want to not be silent. So I want to put on some several series of webinars. I want to do some podcasts. I want to do some Twitter chats around this, but I need your help. And so what I'll say, Corey and Paul, that's the first thing, is you have to tap into your community and tap into your PLN. Matthew Joseph is an immaculate leader. I mean, he's in central office. He has his doctorate. But even with someone with that many accolades, to be able to humble yourself and say, I'm going to call someone to be vulnerable and say, hey, I need help. Right? Even though I should have all these resources, this is the area I'm struggling in. That's the first step, is just saying, hey, I need you. How can I support you? Right. But also finding people who will give you the real. Because you can call someone that can give you, like you said earlier, Paul, think fluffy and just kind of say what you want to hear. But who's going to give you the real and really push you and say, well, Matt, where are you at? Or Paul or Corey or whoever, where are you at in the spectrum? And the reason I say spectrum is because equity is a spectrum. There are some people who are just starting the journey, who have just started the journey, maybe during this time frame, during the pandemic. Their school's doing a book study, and maybe they're looking at white fragility, or why all the black kids sitting in the same area in the cafeteria. A lot of different good books out here, but that's their first kind of take on it, right? And they're trying to grapple with what's going on. And there's some people who are ready to go to war for it, right? But where are you in the spectrum? I think you have to have some of that self-reflection on, where am I at? And then where am I at, and then where do I want to go with it, right? And then be able to do some of that own, self-professional development, because you have to. It's a journey that you have to go on yourself, right? But have a team with you, but you have to allow yourself to say, I want to go on this journey. One of the last things I'll say, I know maybe you all have a comment, is there's a reason why Lifetime, the channel of Lifetime is so, I would say, has a good following, is because when you watch a Lifetime movie, you go through all the emotions in a Lifetime movie, right? You've been happy starting off, and you might get a little sad, and then you might shed a tear, and then it might bring it around back to, oh, you're happy, or maybe some kind of cancer and something happened. But it depends on how the movie will leave you feeling. But the reason that is so powerful is because it made you have emotion. But the thing about it is, Corey and Paul, is that after that movie is done, anybody can get up and turn it off and say, okay, we're starting my day. I'm good. It took me through, but I can turn it off. The thing is if I walk into Walmart, I walk into Target, I walk into Whole Foods, I can't turn my blackness off. I can't say, I really want to be a white woman today. I can't say I'm a 6'5", 250 black belt. You can't miss me, right? And so just off of my stature and who I am, that incites fear in some people just off of that. Right. And so how do you have these dialogues? How do you have people to do some self-reflection and saying that, hey, we are all in this together, and maybe because of my limitations, because I haven't seen things the way other people see it, I have continued the systems of oppression. Right. I haven't checked my own implicit biases. I haven't checked how I see, and how maybe in my own classroom there's some racist things that are going on that I'm allowing to continue to happen, or I'm perpetuating. Right. But I would say, again, calling a friend, asking about PLN, and then starting that journey for how can I do better and how can I disrupt the status quo. That is the theme of our podcast. But disrupting takes work. Right. If you're tearing up a wall, if you're tearing up cement, it's not an easy task. If you can find someone who can do it easy, let me know. But it takes work. It takes work. And in order to be a disruptor, you have to be intentional.
Goodness gracious, folks, if you're listening or you're watching, can you see why? Can you see why Basil was the first guest? I mean, we're talking truth bombs, no hesitation. You know, this is someone who walks his talk, believes in this work, and is really leading us to some great questions and wonderings. And I have one. I want to bring this conversation back. I know I'm going to need to listen to the podcast, like at least that last 5 minutes, like 5 or 6 times to really, truly digest it all. But I want to bring something back because you've got my wheels spinning. So what do you say to the person that's not like us? And what I mean like us is we're Twitter junkies. You know what I mean? We're social media junkies. I'm not on any other social media, but I'm a Twitter junkie. And
right.
There is strength in my professional learning network, no doubt. And that's the reason why I went there first, because I was wondering, are there other crazy folks out there like me, or am I the only person that thinks this way? And I said, it can't be. It can't be. So I've got to go and seek that out. And that's how I met Corey. You know, Corey talked about in the beginning how, you know, seeing him at Ed Camp number 1, then number 2, then number 3. And eventually it was like, we got to talk to each other a little bit and see what keeps bringing us back to the scene, so to speak. But when I ask you this, you've covered the global level, but I think there's a level we have to examine a little bit, and that's the local level. So what would you say to somebody who is either reluctant or resistant to get on social media because they're worried about it, they're afraid about it, they have concerns, and they want to make change, but they're also not confident in, let's say, their leadership, and they're worried. They have a fear of retribution. They think, if I speak out about something, how will that be held against me? Will that be held against me? What will people think? What would you say to those people, Basil?
Wow, Paul, that's a deep question. That's a book right there. My goodness. So how I would attempt to tackle that is, change. You can't change in your comfort zone, right? Change is right on the outside. I don't know if you've all seen the graph where it's a circle and it's like 2 steps outside of the circle is where change happens. But we are, as creatures, we are people who want to stay comfortable, stay safe, right? And I would say when you look into the work of equity, it's not a safe game. Right. And I will say, because people have played it safe for so long, that's exactly why we're in the predicament that we're in. Right. And we're in a system where we want to play it safe, but we want students to take risk and believe in us. We want students to believe in what I'm teaching. We want students to know that you can do better. But as a teacher, administrator, superintendent, you're playing it safe. That doesn't even make sense. And kids can sniff out when I always say real recognize real. One of my favorite rappers is Drake, and he always says real recognize real. And the thing is it's the truth. Kids will sniff out if you're being genuine. If you went to a PD and they said, okay, you got to tell kids on Monday that you got to give high fives that, I care about you. Kid will walk the door and be like, you never did that. Why why are you trying to do that today? Or a better one yet. I love this one. As an administrator, I walk into the room, do observation, and the teacher's trying something new. And the kids will be like, Miss So-and-so, you ain't never did this. Dr. Marin's in here now, and now you want to switch up. Like, the kids will tell on you, right? So the thing is you have to always, be willing to go outside the comfort zone. But to your point about someone on Twitter, I would say, again, there are a lot of my good friend Dr. Tracy Smith says that sometimes the chats can be exhausting sometimes, and that is true. There's a million chats out there. Everyone's trying to support everybody, so you go into them. But sometimes they can be surface level. I'm just going to be real with y'all, brothers. And so I would say maybe start in a chat, but then, like you said, Paul, you and Corey were in the same vicinity. Y'all were looking at some of the same stuff, and then it took you to have a step of courage to say, "Let me hit my man up and just see what's up." Right. And when you made that connection, that was immediately a connection of two are better than one. And Corey could have said, nah, brother, I'm on my own thing, man. To keep, it's good seeing you here, but keep doing you. And that would have been that. That would have been that.
I tried, but he kept begging me.
I hear you, Corey. Now, listen.
It was like the movie Forrest Gump, where it's like seats taken. Like, I couldn't get there. It was a few egg camps before Corey finally let me in.
Oh my God. But luckily, listen, y'all made a partnership, a brotherhood, a friendship, and look where y'all are now. You're starting a podcast talking about topics that, I got to come into the camera. Let's be clear. A lot of people are not trying to talk about. They want to skate around it, walk on eggshells, but this is the work right here. So back to your point, Paul. So contact your friend, reach out to your person. It might even be a supervisor or someone else that's doing the work and say, hey, I have some questions. And I will say that just like students know when people are genuine, educators also know when you're genuine. So if you're coming, so we'll speak about me. If you're coming to me and saying, Basil, I have questions about equity. Can I pick your brain? Can we set up a Zoom? People do it all the time. I can tell you in the first 2 or 3 minutes of questioning whether they're genuine or not, right? And that also will dictate how I carry the conversation, right? If I feel like you're being a little shady, then I'm going to kind of tell you what you need to know, but I'm not going to give you the real Basil because you're not being real with me, right? So the thing is, you have to know, tap into your PLN. Then I would say you need to be listening to podcasts like this that are stretching your thinking, stretching your capacity on how you look at things, right? Because that's the important part. And then again, a lot of the work, Paul and Corey, you have to do internally on your own. After you've done the one-on-one, or you go to the ed camp, or you're going to the podcast, you have to self-reflect, right? Have that alone time and say, where am I at? What am I doing, right? And then what is a stand? What am I going to do to take a stand on this, right? I did a PD once for my teachers at my former school where I was having like a spades tournament. Right. Spades tournament, and there was 8 different tables, and the winner of the table kind of had to move counterclockwise around the room. But one of the main things, Paul and Corey, in the game was that you couldn't talk. So people are playing, and they're playing spades how they know how to play it. And after 30 minutes, I mean, these are department chairs, other leaders in the school. I had people, I'm being real, brothers. People were cursing, people were throwing like, what is this? Like, you don't know how to play spades. And people, if you really know about spades can get a little competitive, right? So people are getting upset. And I'm like, you cannot talk, right? So at the end, I started to do like a debrief about how people felt about the game, and people were like, that was the most terrible game, PD. Dr. Marin, what are you doing? Like, this is not fair. And I'm like, and somebody said, oh, each table had its own set of rules. So when I moved to another table, it was another set of rules. And so you left from your norm to go somewhere else where you didn't know what was going on, right? And that was just 30 minutes, you all, of doing that game. And so I said, the reason I want you all to go through this, leaders, is because we have kids who are ESOL, special ed, at risk, and there's so many different levels of at risk we can go into that go into each different classroom each day where there's a different set of rules, different norms, different expectations. And I have to go through a 7-hour day as a student and be able to navigate all of that every single day.
Yeah, you make some incredible points, and even all the way back to the kids being the best BS detectors in the world, right? They know when it's BS and it's just flying out of their mouths, and it's not meaningful.
Right.
And the other thing I think that you said that was really powerful was, self-reflection and coming to grips with where you are and who you are. Mm-hmm. And I've shared this story with Paul before, that I was a principal at a middle school that was a pretty homogenous school. It was almost all white, and we were in DC for the 8th grade trip, and one of our venues got canceled, so we wound up going to the African American Civil War Museum. And the curator, I believe his first name is Harry, Hari, if you ever Google the speech that he gives. And I sat there, and when he asked the students, what do you know about Abe Lincoln? Of course, they said Emancipation Proclamation. He said, what do you know about his views on race and the races? And nobody said a word, including all the adults that were there. And I sat in that chair, and that was the moment that I realized there needed to be more done to dismantle the status quo, to find out, some of that information, and I don't want to take up the whole podcast on that, but, Lincoln is on record as saying, if not freeing the slaves would win me the war, then I would do that. And that is not in, it really got me, and this is the conversation we had the other day, is not once in my K-12 schooling did I ever hear that or learn that.
Neither
so
have I.
here I am as, this white guy just going along believing, right? Because that's what we do. We're supposed to believe in the people and in our education, believing that this was the only perspective, in history. And until we get in there and really start to provide all perspectives, I think we'll continue to have some challenges, in that realm. And the last part of that is my advice too is try to reflect and sit and think about your own bias. And people don't like to do that. And here's the other thing. When you say that you have bias, it doesn't make you a bad person. It means you have predispositions, right? Mm-hmm. You have experiences that have created your thoughts. So, an example that I give is, try to be real quick. At Ed Camp, I do Dr. Eddie Fergus's belief statements activity, and one of them is children from low socioeconomic backgrounds tend not to have good role models. And when I do the activity, there are a lot of people that agree with that statement. And then we try to have conversation, and it starts to get a little, how could you believe that? I mean, what do you mean? Like, well, look, I think that's true. And I said, well, let me be vulnerable in front of everybody. And Paul's been in the session. When I was a kid growing up in a white household, right, with white parents and white grandparents, I watched the news on TV because that was the only time I was able to control the TV back then. What did I see on the news? What did it lead with? It led with crime, drugs, violence. Where? Inner city. Yeah. Predominantly who? Black and brown people. Yeah. Hey, Dad, they must not have good role models. Mm. It took me 30 years of my life to check that bias. Mm. And it was almost an unconscious bias, but it was there. And if I continue to have that kind of thought process and working with children, to me it doesn't work. So,
ooh, Corey, could we unpack that a little bit? Yeah, because that right there is where it starts. You're absolutely right. We can do all the things that supports in the schools, but it starts at home. Like a lot of things happen. Discipline, the bias that you're brought up with, and it's what we're brought up with, so we don't know any different, right? You think about what you just said, just the news and how the propaganda, how they portray it, right? There was a movie, and please forgive me if I'm going to say it wrong, but I want to say A Birth of a Nation. Way back in the day, was a movie that was one of the first movies, and there were actors, white men, who would walk around, who would be in the movies in blackface, and they were supposed to be black men. And just the way that they were carried throughout the movie, there were a lot of rapes going on, a lot of, like I said, robbings, and so that created a stigma that black men that's who they are, right? And that's one of the first movies. And then, like you said, now the news continues to do that. Right. So when we think about education, you're absolutely right. People, how they're brought up, they bring that to the schoolhouse. They bring their own ideas of but it's not wrong. But again, the main thing in education, the root word is to do what? Is to educate. So yes, not only are we educating children, but we have to also educate ourselves in what we're doing. Right. And the biggest thing is this: we have to check our biases, Corey and Paul, because whatever you do, your actions, your words, what you speak about will come out of that, right? So if you're talking about Abe Lincoln in the classroom, or you're talking about the Civil War, just race, and a lot of times we're going to talk about Black history during February, but it should be talked about all the time, all year round, right? Which is a whole nother podcast. But the thing is that if you're coming from a place where you don't know, or you're bringing only what you were taught, right, that then continues, that's the system of oppression, right? And again, the reason why I put on my Twitter that I'm committed to being a disruptor of a status quo is because I truly believe we're in an educational system not made for students of color to be successful, right? And so in order for students of color to be successful, there has to be some intentional things that are put in place, supports that are put in place to help kids, right? But some of I know maybe we'll get to switch toward the latter part of the podcast, but again, going back to the word access, some of the things that we have seen historically is like special education. A lot of times at elementary level, you'll see schools come together and say, "Oh, Jamal needs we need to get him on a child study, see if we can get an IEP. He's really struggling in certain areas," right? And so no parent is going to say no to more supports, because the way the school's going to spin it is, "Oh, but I just want to give him supports. He'll have someone within the classroom with him. We'll have 2 teachers in the classroom instead of 1. It'll be a great experience." And they tee it up, right? No parent's going to say, "No, I don't want that for my baby," unless you just know, right? But let's be clear, the part of access and the part of systemic oppression of that, though, gentlemen, is that it's very highly unlikely that same student Jamal will be tested for gifted. When we talk about systems of oppression, students are tracked from a very young age on how they're going to be successful. When you're tested for gifted, that typically happens 2nd or 3rd grade, right? A kid's tested for gifted, they do well. All of a sudden, they're uprooted, or a couple days a week, a specialist comes in, or they go to another class during a certain period, and they're starting to already be tracked, right? So then once they're at those higher levels of achievement, then they go into middle school, and because they were gifted in elementary school, what is a gifted track now in middle school? So we're going to continue you on that track, right? And the kids will go through that track in middle school, again, have some of the highest levels of education in that building, and then they get to high school, and then, okay, you know what? We're going to put you in an honors program, or we'll put you in some AP classes. And the literature speaks to students who do well in secondary, post-secondary education, typically are kids who are in honors or AP classes, because that's where they've really learned some of those skills needed at the collegiate level, right? I just went through a whole spectrum of how kids go through the program. Let's go back to Jamal's 2nd grade, because now he's not gifted. He's going to stay in this lower level track, right? And now I'm in 9th grade, and I might want to try for AP. But guess what? As educators, we are gatekeepers. Counselors, administrators, teachers are guilty of it. Sometimes you even did a recommendation. So a teacher will look at, well, in 9th grade, you weren't in any of these higher level classes, Jamal. So we really don't have space this year, but guess what? Maybe next year that'll be a possibility. And you keep just getting booted. And all of a sudden you're a senior and you were never given that opportunity, right? That's a system of oppression, right? And we see it happens across the nation all the time, right? But how do we make sure that we're intentional and give students of color an opportunity to be successful, right? And to give kids an opportunity to be able to be in some of those advanced classes. Let's be honest, you all, some kids are gifted in a certain area, but other areas they struggle. So you might be in a gifted math class, but you really struggle in social studies or in ELA or English, right? But that doesn't mean that I can't give you an opportunity. So as I told my defense team for my dissertation, if we were truly doing education right, Corey and Paul, I should not be a unicorn in being Dr. Marin now as a male of color.
Wow. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to the first ever StatusGROW podcast. But because Dr. Marin has given us so much to think about, we have actually recorded our first 2 episodes. So be on the lookout for episode 1.1, which will be the second half of our conversation with the great Dr. Basil Marin on the StatusGROW Podcast.